On the program, I know it says Cosima is to present, but there's been a slight change. It will be Sarah Kiarie. I'm really pleased to be introducing Sarah because I've known Sarah for a long time. So Sarah is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. She's a partner at Kaplan and Stratton in the Corporate Commercial Department and jointly oversees the department's M&A work. Please, may I have your attention, please? So on her specialist areas is advising on non-contentious employment matters, including transfer of employees, redundancies, mutual terminations. She's also assisted clients in reviewing and preparing employment documents, including employment contracts, HR policies, procedures, employee share ownership schemes, trust deeds, and rules. So she's here to present on the topical topic that we've just been having, vaccinations. We've had it from the South African perspective and also a bit on how it's being handled in Zimbabwe. So now we'll hear it from the Kenyan perspective. Welcome, Sarah.
Hello, everyone. Coming in as the last person presents a lot of challenges, especially after the robust discussion that I've just come in while it was going on. I wish I was there so that I can know how to carry on the discussion. For some reason, I don't know, the presentation is not. Have you found it? The second one. Yeah, there we go. So I'll be taking us through how to build resilience and how to reset at the workplace, in light of COVID-19, and probably focusing more on what happens thereafter and some of the issues and trends that we have seen arising out of the COVID situation. The recovery seems to be a long way out, but we are hoping that it will not take too long. One of the government departments was saying that they're not Kenyan, but I think it was an international WHO that was stating that this might be going on until 2025, which was a bit worrying. But out of the situation, there are certain things that we have learned that will take us post-COVID, and that will assist employers even going forward in terms of trends that were seemingly futuristic, like things like working from home, issues around environmental health and safety that were previously limited to factory workers, issues around data protection, employee experience. We are now getting a lot of gig workers and automation. So we'll be looking at these things in the context of COVID-19, these being some of the trends and issues that are arising from COVID-19, but which will carry us through to the future of work. All right, so I think we'll have a look at the remote working or hybrid working. Many terms that have been used to describe this phenomenon: teleworking, telecommuting, flexible working, the wandering employee. People can virtually work from wherever, a coffee house, the beach, but they're still able to deliver. If we look at remote working, I think one of the key issues, and I'm sure Anne has taken you through this, I didn't have the chance to sit in because I was introducing the speaker on the other side. But one of the things is making sure that we anchor this policy, the remote working in a policy, just so that there is consistency in terms of the application of remote working, and just to make sure that it actually works. So some of the things that we would be looking at, or other employers would be looking at, is to make sure that, like I've said, there's a policy which sets out how remote working is going to work out within the workplace. For most employers, it will be looked at as a privilege and not a right, but that is changing. Then we'll also be looking at what roles can be, next slide, please. What roles can, what roles lend themselves to remote working? So you're looking at people who are doing work that is, probably desk work that doesn't need a lot of administrative support, because of course, if you're doing something that is, requiring physical administrative work or client facing, that might not lend itself to remote working. Also looking at which employees can work remotely, because as we know, we have different personalities. There are people who need a lot of supervision, who might not be able to work effectively remotely. So those are just some of the soft issues around remote working that employers will need to address. Then one of the key issues that is really coming out is how to measure output. How do you monitor and evaluate performance when you actually don't have employees at the workplace? Increasingly moving towards being more result oriented rather than looking at how many hours people are putting in, which is, I think, a curse with law firms. But I think we need to reinvent how we actually measure output and how we probably charge. Then the right to, one other thing that employers we need to look at is the right to entry. Being able, where employees are working from home, being able to actually get access to the employee's home, to be able to assess the environment to see whether the employee is actually able to work from home. For instance, when you want to set up an employee on their machine, for employers that are providing, printers or whatever, that you might probably need to check or inspect, that has to be provided for in the policy. Then also to address the issue of company equipment, what equipment will the employee be providing? We've had a scenario where an employee was demanding for a generator because allegedly he was living in a place where there were a lot of employment cuts. Others are demanding for high level kind of printers. If you don't have a policy in place, it will be very difficult to assess what you can give, and especially where you've given one employee certain tools and someone else is demanding for the same, you would be setting yourself up for discrimination claims. So that it's important that that is also included in the policy. Issues of insurance, still on the previous slide. Insurance and tax. The presentation by Terry yesterday addressed very well the issue of the risk in creating a permanent establishment and the tax implications, so I won't belabor that. But also the issue of insurance for company equipment. If you're providing laptops, insurance, laptops, printers, generators, who is responsible for that insurance and how will that be treated from a tax perspective? Is it a benefit or is it a rechargeable expense? Next slide, please. So some of the practical issues to consider is the need to amend contracts of employment, looking around the clause where place of work, because that's actually a requirement under the law to include the place of work, adjusting that to include working from home, how to manage annual leave and sick leave, especially when people are working remotely. Most employers have now gone into a system where you can apply for leave remotely or through a system, so you don't physically have to complete forms. Just making sure that actually when employees go on leave, whether it's sick leave or annual, that they can actually take leave. Because I think in many instances, clients assume that when you're not working from home, when you're working from home, you can be working because there is no set time for stopping work. So just trying to manage that so that you avoid burnout. We've spoken about performance management, looking at rather than how much time an employee has sat on their desk. Issues of recruitment, training, and networking, especially when you're recruiting someone who is coming from a different organization. They need to be able to get on, understand what the culture and the organization is, and you're doing this remotely, it becomes difficult to recruit them and onboard them. So just trying to consider how that will be dealt with. Issues around where the employee is working from. I think we had this discussion at length yesterday, and the tax implications that arise from this when an employee is working, for example, from a Kenyan employee is working in another jurisdiction or vice versa, the question of PE and income tax. Then one of the other significant issues is safeguarding confidentiality and data protection, especially where you have an employee who is working from home. Anybody can access their machine. They might be sitting with your computer in a cafe, and with their back to other people who might actually be seeing the kind of work that they're doing. How do you guard against that? If you're dealing with paper documents, how are those being stored away? It's a difficult one, but it's something that we need to think around. Then the issue of incorporating hybrid working or teleworking in our organizational strategies, so that we can be able to invest in this, get in place systems that will be able to support hybrid working, because I think this is here to stay. So those are some of the practical issues to consider around remote working. And like I said, some of the challenges and possible solutions, how to maintain relationships and corporate culture, both relationships between our employees and also relationships between employees and clients, and how to maintain corporate culture when people are not physically sitting in the office. We've seen organizations that are, setting out. There's actually one interesting organization that actually had set out a session for yoga, and everyone is required to, put on their cameras and participate in an online yoga session. Just to make sure that people are, the culture is maintained, and also the issue of wellness. That was quite interesting. Then being able to balance the personalities and the different needs of people. Some introverts might just disappear. Extroverts might probably struggle because they don't have, the chit-chat conversations around the water fountain. Issues to do with communication, because you no longer have the privilege or the benefit of clarifying instructions that you're giving. So making sure that you're able to communicate instructions right the first time and not having to clarify things as you go along. And finally, of course, we are human, things go wrong. Internet cuts, electricity cuts. You might be having an employee might be having a challenge with their connectivity or electricity just before you have a significant meeting. How do you deal with that? Do you give people some sort of backup plans, backup data or inverters to take care of, high risk sort of meetings, and people also get sick. Just being able to manage that as well. Mental health and well-being has been dealt with at length yesterday, so I won't go a lot into that. The issues around environmental health and safety have been addressed significantly. One of the things is around vaccination. Of course, employers have an obligation to provide a safe working environment. How do you deal with somebody who has refused to be vaccinated? Currently, we're aware in Kenya, we don't have a specific law on this, and there's a matter that is in Nakuru arising from the government directive for public servants to vaccinate. That is yet to, we're yet to get any decision that will provide guidance. But currently, based on the rights under the Constitution, right to religion, because a number of people are citing religion as the reason why they are not ready to be vaccinated, freedom of conscience, belief, and culture. That might present a challenge, but what we are seeing increasingly is employers not forcing people to vaccinate, but telling you that if you're not vaccinated, you'll not be able to come into the office, or you'll be required to double mask, restrict your movement within the office, which might also create other issues. So that's one of our significant issues. But I think going forward, the idea is to assess issues on a case-by-case basis, because not all situations are the same. Okay, I'll move to one of the other issues that is coming up quite a lot, data protection. This is we have a new Data Protection Act that governs how employers process, not only employers, but employees as well, how they will process data, personal data relating to clients, other employees, a whole spectrum of data. Like I had mentioned earlier, the issue around people accessing your data in a place that can be visible to other people, how do we manage that? So the idea is to have policies in place to manage and to ensure that employers are able to comply with their statutory obligations to do with data protection. Next slide, please. Next one. Yeah, okay, thank you. One of the other important things that is coming up is the the issue of employee experience, human experience. People are calling it HX. How people experience the organization, your organization as an employer. Managers no longer, being in a position where they're just giving instructions, being able to relate and having emotional intelligence and not just technical competency. This is coming up a lot, especially where you have institutions that have been running for long and people are used to that kind of culture. Adapting to the remote working environment is testing that. Organization values, people are increasingly using social media as an outlet, especially with the remote working, because people are feeling lonely. How do you manage that in a positive way so that you give employees that freedom to also express your company culture to the world out there, but being able to maintain the requisite data protection, confidentiality, etc. Issues of mental health and employee wellness, which is a key component of employment today, especially, this has been heightened by COVID and the isolation that people have experienced, but this is one of the things that post-COVID, I think it was coming, it's just that COVID has accelerated it. So that's one of the things that employers will have to really look at. And just the idea of supporting employees to have more fulfilling lives. Like I said, these are issues that will go beyond COVID. Then finally, of course, Millennials and Generation Z, I think that is also tied to the previous slide. And increasingly, most of our employees are younger people. I know, I'm not very sure where millennials start because there are very different theories about who is a millennial and who is not. But the kind of culture and the kind of things that the attitudes that they have are different from what they've had previously. And so we need to take those into account. Yeah, now finally, the issue of automation and gig workers. We are seeing increasingly that employers are looking to outsource, especially in light of the uncertainty that COVID has brought in. So we've had situations where an employee has told, for example, a whole department that does deliveries, you guys come together, set up your own company, we'll support you, give you work, because we can't really manage the uncertainty of work. People are increasingly moving to outsourcing and gig workers, you're just given a job, do it, which is that's going to change the future of work. Traditionally, that was not there, but I think now we need to have legislation governing and protecting gig workers. And of course, automation and technology, which is changing work as we know it. With the uncertainty, the cost of employees, many employers are looking to automate. We've seen banks doing this, which has led to layoffs. And these are some of the trends that have been accelerated by COVID, but they were actually what we're going to face in future. So we need to address this in order to be able to be resilient and to deal with the future of work. That's it. I don't know whether we have any time for any questions.
Thank you for that presentation, for highlighting the trends that have been accelerated through COVID, that we have to look into the gig workers, automation, and also our millennials. So we have one question.
So much for your presentation. It's covered a couple of other things that weren't discussed yesterday. That's the future of work. I like that. So my question is on, I know you've addressed data. I want to ask a question on data privacy specifically. Mm-hmm. This question was asked yesterday, but I want to hear your views on the same. To what legal extent does an employer have to monitor the work of a remote worker? Yeah, the answer that was given yesterday is to the extent that the laptop is the company's, but then I'm still wondering to what extent can an employer view the activity of a worker who is elsewhere?
Yeah. Thank you for that question and for your compliment. I think there are two aspects to this. One, the employer has an obligation to ensure the confidentiality of the data that the employees are processing on their behalf. So you have an obligation and you'd actually be statutory liable if in the course of the employees' dealings, they were to breach the statutory provisions dealing with data protection. Now, you have to do that within a framework that also protects the employees' confidentiality. Now, like I think the discussion yesterday was around if the laptop is owned by the employer, which is what most employers prefer, then they have a right to access it even remotely to ensure that you actually comply with the law, because the risk is on them if something was to go wrong. So in as much as we don't have specific legislation touching on that and how far an employer can go in terms of accessing employee data remotely, there's a need to balance the interests of both parties, the employer's obligations and also the employees. Where you draw that line, I think, will vary from one entity to another. And also, I think it depends on the kind of data. I think when you're dealing with, sensitive data, I think the threshold would be higher. And the issue of notice, if you've told your employees that I'm actually going to be accessing your computer, then they should know, and you'd expect better of them as opposed to when you're, sneakily doing that. So I think the issue is around consultation, letting employees know that this is what we're going to be doing, and we're doing this not because we are being, around to that, snitching on you, but because we are trying to comply with our legal obligations. So I think that will make the conversation easier. But for employers, I think you have no choice.